I promise you, talking about Donald Trump is not something I enjoy doing, and I very much look forward to the day when I don't have to do it. But here in the Therapist React series, we talk about what's happening in the news so that we can learn lessons to improve our mental health. We talk about things that are going on in pop culture so we can understand psychology and understand the psychotherapeutic lessons within these stories. And there has been something that happened, like a major development that happened yesterday that we have to talk about. But before I do, once again, I'm Elliott Connie, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and this series is really important because of the lessons that we learn. And we're gonna do this even when it's hard. We're gonna do this even when it's challenging, because sometimes mental health requires us to do hard things. And I wanna talk about admitting when you're wrong and admitting when you've been duped. And I want to talk about that in relation to what's going on with Donald Trump. So I got a really big question about this whole Donald Trump series, or this whole Donald Trump saga, probably better stated, which is this the beginning of the end of Donald Trump? And I'm not even talking about that politically. I don't care what his political affiliations are. I'm not interested in those things. I'm actually talking about that on the fundamentals of how Donald Trump built his brand, which is a businessman, because the ruling that happened yesterday is kind of the end. Donald Trump must dissolve his business interests in New York. He needs to report any movement of assets, and he needs to disclose all of his financial records, and he needs to disclose all of his secret partners. He's got to tell the court everything. He has fallen off the Forbes Fortune 500 list because they've deflated his wealth. And I made a video about Donald Trump a few days ago, and people got all mad at me, right? Like, I just talked about how Donald Trump was being accused of fraud and the way he inflated his wealth. And people got mad at me. You can't just tell a bank how much you owe. He didn't just call the bank and say, oh, I'm worth this much money. He had his accountants and his lawyers file false bank records. Like, he tricked them. And it's at this point, he's not even disputing it. If you paid attention to what happened in court, Donald Trump is not saying it didn't happen. Donald Trump is saying, my accountant did it. I didn't know anything about it. He's not disputing the claim, people. Why are you so willing to believe the lies that Donald Trump has told you? And there's a weird psychological thing, is we don't want to admit we've been fooled. Human beings don't like admitting they've been tricked, but you have. You've been misled. You have been completely misled by Donald Trump. And he's been doing it for a very, very long time. And now this court is saying, we now have evidence that there is fraud. That has actually been decided and ruled. The big major sticking point of this case has been decided. There is fraud here. And again, Donald Trump's lawyers and Donald Trump are not disputing that. They're not saying it didn't happen. They're saying this accountant did it. And that's the debate. But I want you to listen. It's not just me. I want you to listen to this.
Core of Donald Trump's puffed up, manufactured identity lies in what he described there, right? This branded sense of business acumen, the value of his assets, his deal making, in his words again, his wealth. But the veneer of that persona was pierced by New York Judge Arthur Engoron, who found Donald Trump liable for fraud in the New York Attorney General's civil case against him. And now Judge Engoron took a step to implement his decision on Trump's liability, a ruling he was able to make before the trial even started. As a result of a new order filed by that judge today, the Trump Organization must show the court they are complying with the order to cancel their business certificates in New York and notify any movement of assets or creation of new entities. Now, in plain language, it's over. Lights out. Trump cannot do business anymore in New York, and he cannot move money around that could tamper with the case.
So think about that for a second. I have someone close to me who in 2016 told me that she was a Donald Trump supporter and voted for Donald Trump and really believed in Donald Trump. And I asked her why. I was really troubled by the rhetoric coming out of Donald Trump's mouth during the campaign. And she said because he's a really strong businessman, and she thought the country should be led by a really strong businessman. But it turns out that's not true. He's a fraudulent businessman. And I think this is just the beginning. If you pay attention to what's going on here, it's the beginning. And you just heard that reporter say, like, it is over. He can no longer do business in New York City. He has to dissolve his business interests. He cannot create new business interests without telling the court, and he cannot move any assets without telling the court. He has to disclose all of his financial records, all of his secret partners. He's got to show it all. People, it is okay to acknowledge you've been tricked. It is okay to acknowledge you believed a lie. It is okay to acknowledge you were wrong. Human beings is this weird psychological thing where it's actually hard for us to do that. So even when we know we've been tricked, we're gonna defend ourselves. We get super defensive and we start explaining how we've been tricked and how we've been duped. It's okay to acknowledge that with the information I had at the time, I believed one thing, and I now have new information that's leading me to believe another. When you can do that, you have strong mental health. I mean, go look at the videos in these series, the videos I've made about Donald Trump, and look at the comments. There are people defending this without understanding what is happening. Someone said, you must not have bought a house. You can't just tell the bank what you owe. No, I absolutely own a home. And you absolutely cannot just tell the bank how much your assets are unless you falsify documents, which is exactly what is happening here. So don't defend what has already been decided. And I find it interesting when we accuse the court system of being swayed or biased towards black people who are innocent and have to spend 30 years in prison because of a court system. People say, no, that's the court system. The Republicans often say that they're the party of justice and law and order. But when it's Donald Trump, they say, oh, it's all flawed. People make this argument that they're only going after Donald Trump because Joe Biden wants to remove him as an opponent. Even if that were true, which that's ridiculous, but even if that were true, there'd have to be evidence, right? Even if that's true, I can't just trump up charges, no pun intended. I can't just make up charges. Even if it is true that I'm only trying to remove Donald Trump as an opponent, there's evidence there that he actually did the thing. The judge just ruled on it. It has been decided. It is no longer alleged. The judge has ruled there is fraud here. Donald Trump is not even arguing that point. He is saying the accountant did it. So we have to understand what is happening here, and we have to have the mental fortitude. We have to have the mental health strong enough to admit that I fell for it. I fell for it. No, I never was a Donald Trump supporter, but I believed he was a strong businessman. I remember watching the very first season of his television show, The Apprentice. I really enjoyed it. I thought he was a strong businessman. Turns out he's not. And that's exactly how he built his whole platform. And it's not true, and it's not real. It's not true, and it's not real. I want to show you another clip.
How do you expect that he will respond to, one, falling off the Forbes list, and then this order from the judge essentially making it much more difficult for him to operate his businesses in New York?
I think it's going to be extremely unsettling. And also, Melissa, I think another shoe is going to drop very soon, which is in the order today, they ordered him to disclose secret equity partners in any of the interests.
Now, I mentioned earlier that Donald Trump was removed from the Forbes 400 list. Have you heard the story on how he got on the Forbes 400 list? He pretended to be somebody named John Barron. Now, back then, right, there's no internet, there's no social media, any of that stuff. This was in 1982. And he called the Forbes reporter to talk about Donald Trump's wealth. And here, listen to this.
Okay, what's your first name, John? John Barron. Let me tell you what the deal is, just so you understand. Okay. Mr. Trump bought, first of all, most of the assets have been consolidated to Mr. Trump. Are you saying that perhaps for tax purposes the ownership has been transferred to Donald Trump? Correct. That's correct.
All right, so you can find that on the internet. It goes on longer and longer than that. But basically, he pretends to be this guy named John Barron. He calls this reporter for Forbes, May 17, 1984. And he describes Donald Trump's wealth in a way to make sure he gets on the Forbes list. And he's been on the Forbes list ever since, until now, when we're all accepting that it was fraudulent, it was inflated, and thus not real. People with healthy mental health can admit that they've made a mistake. Given the information they had at the time, they believed one thing, and now with new information, they can believe another. If you cannot do that, your mental health is in question. I am one of them. Given the information I had at the time, I believed Donald Trump was a very strong businessman, and thus watched the TV show The Apprentice. Really enjoyed it. With new information, I no longer think that's true. In fact, I think he's criminal. I said in the previous video that these activities weren't criminal. People killed me. Like, why are you saying this? What I mean is criminal versus civil. This is a civil trial. He's not going to go spend any time in prison. But this is probably the beginning of the end of the Donald Trump empire. And I think it gets much worse from here. So I want you guys to have strong mental health. Admit when you're wrong. Admit you've been tricked. It's good for you. I want to know what you think of this. Please leave a comment below. I'm super excited. I read every single comment, even the mean, nasty, hurtful ones. I read those too. So please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching this video. I love you guys for being here. Please like this video, share this video, and support my channel by hitting that subscribe button and then also hitting the notification bell so you get notified each and every time we release a video in the Therapist React series, which is every single day, Monday through Friday. Love y'all for being here. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.